I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:02 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Here.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Here.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Mr. Escobedo?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Before we go any further, I'd like to thank Rod and Connor, who are in the back helping to produce the broadcast for tonight on Channel 20. Thank you, guys. We have no speakers, so I will not go through the petitions and communications reading, but I'll open it up to the board for board member comments at this time.
Take care of that.
I'm going to let you take care of it.
Oh, you're so kind.
Mrs. McCulloch.
So could you ask Rod?
Rod,
can you hear us?
Hey, Rod, could we have you come out in front here? Okay.
Rod, how many years have you been helping us?
3 years.
Okay.
3 years. So Rod's been working behind the scenes 3 years, and I don't think we ever recognize you enough. So here's a Christmas present from the board.
Okay, all right.
And we also want to recognize our board secretary, Ms. Fromm.
Mrs. Fromm.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
so and I would also like to say a thank you to 3 of our current board members, Mr. Rollins, Mr. Siegel, and Mrs. McCulloch, who have decided that they would like to stay on and run for another term. And we're happy about that. So we don't know yet. The elections will be in the spring, but go vote. There you go.
We can't engage in election.
We can't. No, I'm just thanking them for their service. All righty. Okay, we'll move on then to the consent portion of our agenda, including the following items. The meeting minutes of November 17th, 2018, payroll, accounts payable, and purchase orders, the contracts under $10,000, and the construction bid request log and travel. The recurring contracts for No Red Ink, Reading Horizons, our ROE Kids second addendum to the contract, Edgenuity, and the other consent items including the Workers' Compensation Settlement Agreement for CE, the Workers' Compensation Settlement Agreement for MW, the 2019-20 Academic Calendar, the ESL Bilingual Endorsement Cohort, and the Freedom of Information Log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Dixon. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Rollins.
8C.
8C or 8?
C as in Charlie.
Okay, very good. Okay. Any others? Okay. If not, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of consent items not pulled.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. I'll now take a motion and a second for the approval of item 8C, which is the 2019-20 academic calendar.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Rollins. Comments or questions? Mr. Rollins.
Well, we are making some significant changes to the academic calendar this year, at least compared with recent years past, and I just thought it would be a good idea to give the administration a chance to talk about the process and some of the thoughts behind why those changes are being made.
Dr. Jarrett?
Yeah, I'd be happy to start that conversation. First, I'll start with Dr. Vosberg, who has really headed this, and I'll give him an opportunity to talk about the process behind the work, and then I'll be happy to chime in with in terms of some rationale behind our decision.
Dr. Vosberg?
Good evening. Yes, there are significant changes this year on the calendar. I think you can look at two areas. First, some guidance from the state and state requirements requiring us to have 176 days of student attendance is a major shift for us. It took 4 days that we typically use to cover for parent-teacher conferences and school improvement days and made those instructional days. We think long-term that's good for students, 4 more days of instruction. I think the second major shift in the calendar is around the start date. And as we know, in the past, we've had a lot of feedback from our teachers and parents and students about the heat in the buildings in August. Typically, those are the hottest days of the school year. And we made a decision through a collaborative process and a consultative process with the REA to start after Labor Day, which is about 10 school days later than we would normally start. By doing that, we have to change some other pieces of the calendar so we can get in as many instructional days as possible before state testing in the spring. So we've modified the time we would have out over winter break by 2 days. We modified some of our other typical days that we have off, like Casimir Pulaski Day, which allows us to make up those days, those 10 days, and allows us to get as many instructional days in as possible before state testing. This will also impact high schools and final exams. When we start in September, we won't be able to get enough instructional days in before our winter break. So going back to what we did maybe 4 years ago, we'll have final exams in January, about mid-January. Students will come back from break and have, I think, 7 or 8 instructional days before they begin their final exams. So those are the biggest shifts that you're going to see in the calendar, and probably hear a lot of feedback from different people in the community. And you know, it's definitely something that we think is important that we made these adjustments. It's something that we've had feedback in the past that drove these changes, but we anticipate this will be a shift for a lot of people.
Thank you. And I would just add that one of the other things we heard as we talked about the start of our school year with Institute Day, we received a lot of positive feedback on having a very differentiated approach to Institute Day. In other words, we offered very customized offerings that were out of people's buildings to start the school year this year. There were some logistical issues that had to be worked out, but largely teachers did feel heard that we were offering some customized training. What they did not like was not having time in their building before that. And so this later start to the school year, we are committed to maintaining our cleaning schedule and getting buildings up and going so the teachers have the ability to come into their classrooms prior. We also have 3 Institute days instead of 2 on the front end, which allows a full day in the building with faculty and staff in their buildings with 2 days for the central training. So we think that a lot of the classroom setup concerns will be able to be addressed. So I think ultimately this is adding instructional days and losing the risk of the heat days and giving teachers a stronger start to the school year. We think all 3 of those were the driving forces for why we thought this was a good decision for our families and for our students.
Mr. Dixon.
Yes, I just want you briefly to touch the football season. Well, I'm a big fan of football season, especially high school.
Okay.
Just touch that, how we're going to handle that, and just to assure everybody.
Yes. So athletics will not be impacted. Under the current schedule, there are about 2 weeks for most. There are many sports that already start contests well before students return to school, and so that will give us the ability to address, that will not impact students' ability to participate in co-curricular experiences, and specifically, as you mentioned, football. We will make some efforts and outreach efforts with our director of athletics and particularly at the middle school level where there may be some students that are new and kind of exploring sports and maybe aren't as connected to the coaches yet. We're going to make some outreach efforts to middle school students and that are currently in middle school as well as 8th graders that are transitioning in ninth grade to make sure that they are made aware of those options. Sometimes the start of the school year does add a few students to the participation roles in those areas, so we'll make sure we make a coordinated effort to get the word out. But there will be no impact at all on students' ability to participate in co-curricular activities.
Ms. McCullough?
So while this began as a conversation about heat in the schools and trying to limit the number of hot days, which there are more in August than there would be in June because we're going to go into that first week, one of the concerns I hear is that this is our end game. You know, you're doing this so that you don't have to put air conditioning in the schools. Now, as a board member, I'm just one board member. I can't promise where we're going to go with our next facilities task force and plan. We do that in 2020. We started, and then in 2022 is not really until, I'll let you give those dates. But I just really want to assure people, especially our staff, that we have heard you and we'll be having conversations about air conditioning. This doesn't mean we're not going to do that just because we changed the start of the school. We truly want to identify where money would come from for that and what the priorities are going to be in the next facilities plan. But this is not to usurp any conversation about air conditioning in the schools as we move forward and what we might be able to do. Rather, it's somewhat of a stopgap measure to at least help alleviate the number of hot days that our students and staff have to have in the buildings who don't have spaces that are air conditioned.
And just to provide the date, 2022-23 would be the last year of our 10-year facilities plan. So we would probably start those conversations at some point during the 2021 school year to give us a couple years to have a community-wide conversation.
Mr. Escobedo?
So this year we've talked about a lot about academic achievement, and wondering if you guys someone can speak a little bit about whether this would be any impact or positive, negative about with regards to academic achievement and academic environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are three things that I think are really closely tied to giving us the opportunity to create conditions to increase student achievement. One of those would be having less of those high heat days where in non-air conditioned buildings it does make particularly the afternoons challenging. It's not to say that we will not have hot days in September or early June, but we think there are less of, there will be a minimum of 5 days that are kind of that are less at risk for real hot temperatures. So we think that's a positive. Two, having a stronger opportunity to have teachers have time to get their rooms set up and ready to go, and also additional Institute Day investments on professional development on the front end can really help to a strong start to the school year. And then three, the state changing its rule that instead of being able to modify through school improvement days or release for parent-teacher conference days, that we have to have a minimum of 176 attendance days now. That will be an impact of 4 on our middle schools and our elementaries, and we'll get a 5th additional day because we are now moving our graduation ceremonies into the evenings for high school. So anytime that you can take your greatest resource of students and pair them with the greatest that additional opportunity for learning, we think that is a recipe where those conditions could be created.
Mr. Connor?
A couple things. Number one, because it is a reality that recruiting teachers is going to get more difficult, does this calendar have any impact in terms of how we recruit and our ability to be competitive in terms of getting the teachers hired?
I'll turn that over to Mr. Zediker, but I will just say initially that we are really working hard to move all of our recruiting pipeline timelines up anyways. So I don't anticipate with those changes that the 2-week swing at the end would have a huge impact. If you're in mid-August or late August, you're still really struggling, particularly in this really tight labor market, to get positions. We are hoping to have much more of that work wrapped up earlier, but I'll turn it over to Mr. Zediker for specifics.
Yeah, I would agree, just with our timeline being pushed up in terms of when we advertise and when we offer our teachers, I don't see this as a negative impact to bringing teaching staff into the district.
My second question is, what impact, if any, does this have on summer school?
I mean, I can turn it over to Mrs. Detman, but summer school typically is well over before then, so.
It actually gives us more opportunity in the month of August, and so we've been exploring adding some shorter-term exploratories and what we're calling dive-ins to the year. So we're in the process of planning that now to really maximize the extra summer time, so students could really be engaged in something with the district for the whole summer.
My third is really a comment, is give credit to the administration. I think from my point of view, as a community member, somebody who's got family, both as employees and as participants, as students, is that this was very thoughtful. So I want to say thank you to the administration, to the teachers that gave their thoughts, certainly to the administrators out in the buildings for their thoughtfulness, that as a group, this seemed to me a really good collaborative effort. And so I really, as a layperson, couldn't second guess it, but I am very pleased with the process. So I want to thank everybody for coming to the table with this.
Ms. McCulloch, do you have another comment?
Yeah, there were two other areas that I know we all had gotten some feedback on, and so I just wanted to address those. I don't think we talked. The finals piece, Dr. Vosberg mentioned, was going to be pushed into the new year after the break. And what is it, 3 years ago, we pushed back the start of our start of school to mid-August so that we could get everything in before Christmas, or before the winter break. And one of the things I asked for, nobody's been able to show me that we had any improvement in our achievement or our test scores on those finals by pushing it into December. So had that been the case, I might have felt a little bit weary about that change, but I feel like now students will come back and they'll have a chance to catch their breath, do review, get really back into the swing of things before they take those final exams. So I'm very comfortable with that, but I know that that was a concern. The other concern, and I thought it was pretty valid, was that there would not be enough instructional days before AP exams, the national tests that our students take. But if you look at the number of days that we're loading into the calendar between, they're not taking off for Institute days, they're not taking off for Casimir-Pulaski, they have 4 additional days because of the SIP and parent-teacher conferences, and then the 2 extra days after New Year's, they're going to have the same number of days before they take those tests that they would have had previously. So, and there was one other piece. Well, it's escaping me. I'm excited about the instructional days before the start of the school year because we have new initiatives like we had the integrated literacy, but our teachers to be able to come together and be ready to go instead of having Institute days during the year when they've already been teaching the students. Let's all start on the same page with the same information. So, and I too would like to thank administration for all the work that they put in on this and the work that the REA did to have them, to coordinate the meetings. So, thank you.
Okay. The coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 8C, the 2019-20 academic calendar.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We're now on to the closed session consent agenda items, including the following: the appointment of Susan Urim as the 12-month educational tech coordinator, the HR organizational report and addendum, and the closed session consent items for student discipline. Unless otherwise modified below, the board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations in the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. Student 4233 is expelled for the remainder of this school year. Students 4234, 4235, and 4236 are expelled for the remainder of this school year through the first semester of the 1920 school year, and student 4232 is expelled for the remainder of this school year through the entire 2019-20 school year. And the following students received EIAs. Students 1032, 1033, 1034, 1035, student 3696, 3697, 3698, 3699, student 3700, student 3701, 3702, 3703, 3704, 3705, 3706, 3707, 3708, 3709, 3710, students 3711, 3712, 3713, 3714, 3715, 3716, 3717, student 3718, 3719, 3720, 3721, and student 3722. Is there a motion and a second to approve the closed session consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Any items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the closed session consent items.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Our next item is the superintendent's report. Dr. Jarrett.
A couple exciting items to report on. One, I had the opportunity to see absolutely the finest middle school production I think I've ever had a chance to see in terms of quality and effort, and I've seen some great ones in our district, but the West Middle School Kappa production of The Wiz with a 20-plus person community orchestra was absolutely outstanding. And I had a chance to see it in a packed auditorium. I think there were 500-plus people on the Saturday night. I had a chance to see it. The cast was excellent. The stage was excellent. Just really, really well done. So kudos to the faculty, staff, students, and community that made that an absolutely outstanding experience. Also wanted to highlight that we had our first graduating class from the RU pathway, not for our group of undergraduate students, but our first graduate students, our first master's cohort. And there was a really touching moment that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in some collaborative writing. But I'm really excited to share the story of, on stage, we had a first-year RU undergraduate student, Antonio Ramirez, who had the chance to thank his teacher, Mrs. Utek from Jefferson High School, who encouraged him to become a teacher, and he had an opportunity to have a hand in giving her a hug on stage and handing out her diploma. So Radford University did an amazing job of connecting a student who had been inspired to become a teacher and is one of our students with one of his teachers who was getting her graduate degree. That's what this investment is all about, and it's nice to see after years and years of discussing this that is starting to happen. And really powerful to see not only a teacher and a group of 20 teachers getting their master's degree in a very meaningful master's degree program, but the connection to our future teachers was apparent that evening as well. Very powerful.
Thank you. Thank you. We are now into the action items, and our first item is the high school master scheduling proposal. Is there a motion and a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Ms. McCullough?
Have there been any changes to this proposal or how it's going to be executed since it was presented to us at our last meeting?
Mrs. French is here.
Good evening. Yes, there has been one change, and that is with the incentives to give the high schools allocations. Initially, our proposal was looking at providing the allocations in the year 2021 based on whether or not they met the high school purity rate next year, and we felt that that would be it would be difficult for them to achieve purity without that incentive up front. So in my conversation with Dr. Jarrett and Cabinet and the master schedulers, we decided to look at a method that would require them to get to 75% purity. And if they meet that purity level, then they would get the additional allocations, which will allow them in this school year to schedule for purity for the next school year, instead of essentially sort of taking away and then giving it back.
So, and the fiscal impact on that is what?
So the fiscal impact will be overall an additional the equivalent of 7 FTEs to all of our high schools. And that is looking at providing a few additional FTEs, 2.4 to Auburn because of their scheduling and the way that they have to balance the 4 traditional academies with our 2 special programs. It's been extremely difficult for them to get anywhere near purity, trying to balance the same amount of allocations as our other high schools, because our other high schools are really scheduling for 4 academies, whereas Auburn's scheduling for essentially 7, if you're including a freshman component there.
So was this summary rewritten to identify these additional positions and the changes?
The PDSA was rewritten and the presentation was updated.
Okay. And the administrative piece right up front has those 7 extra?
It does not.
But that's what we're voting on. So
Correct.
I just feel like it should reflect what we're voting on should be here. Yes. So I don't know how we want to handle that, if you want to. And then I'm assuming that the allocations are in the budget?
Yes.
And
so
we have...
Allocations will be built into the budget, so what we're really asking for your approval on is the stipend.
Correct.
The allocations will ultimately be baked into and as part of the process, and we typically don't bring building level allocations to the board for board approval, so that's just to provide additional context to the board of how this all works together.
And I guess so a master scheduler, I mean, the most of their work is done the spring before when they're getting their allocations right, and then throughout the summer. And then once the school starts, they have to make all the shifts because I understand filling classrooms and the like. And then is it a full FTE? What do they do the rest of the year? I mean, are they continually moving? Because we're starting as a stipend, right?
Correct.
So I guess I'm not understanding the FTE. Please help me.
Sure. So what we're asking for right now is not an FTE, a full-time person to do this work. That's not what we're asking for tonight. Tonight we're asking for a stipend to support a person to do the training for our current master schedulers who are also 12-month assistant principals in our high schools.
Okay.
The additional allocations would support the schedulers in building a schedule with academy purity. So the FTEs or the allocations are going to the high schools to help them ensure that as they build their purity, they're able to still include some of their liberal arts courses and ensure that those are available to all students as well as electives.
And I appreciate the transparency and the fact that everybody's bringing it forward, but I'm still unclear that then what do they do all year? Because they're not teaching as well as doing this. I understand the stipend piece for the scheduler.
So currently
So it's an administrator.
So currently they're the 12-month assistant principals. They're the deans of curriculum. They oversee an academy as an academy principal, and they're the master scheduler. So they're doing all 4 of those.
So it's not a brand new FTE.
No, we're asking for a stipend or a differential.
I got the stipend part. I'm asking about the FTE part. In the future,
Sure.
That's not today. I get it. You got to get your 75% purity and kind of earn that.
Yes.
Right,
so
but I
this
just want to
work-
understand what
right.
that is, because I wouldn't expect for you to come back, and although it's nice to come back and say, hey, it worked.
Yeah, so that is our plan, to come back if it works, and then bring forward the request to add a full-time position to do this work. But we're not committed to that yet. It will only be if this works. And if this works, and we do add that position, this person, in addition to master scheduling training would be responsible for some auditing of our coursework, some training of our counselors and office professionals to ensure that the schedule is done right, that no student starts the school year without a schedule. And there are multiple layers that Mr. Zediker and I have worked on, kind of thinking through what is it that is not being done because of lack of capacity that this person could really do should this training piece work out.
Thanks for
The
your
way
help
that
with
we've,
that.
sure.
Mrs. Holdy, do you want to clarify the question on what we're voting on? We got it? Okay. Mr. Connor, then.
Yeah, so for the 3 people listening now that weren't at the Committee of the Whole meeting,
Okay.
thank you for listening tonight. What I will say is, a lot of these details were presented at Committee of the Whole, a lot of the questions answered. And number one is that master scheduling, and again, as a layperson, one of the things that I've understood is the difficulty of the coordination is really the key here. And the way I understand the plan is that, number one, you are going to have the training, but to be clear, that the assistant principals, or AP as the cool kids always say it, is that those positions have other responsibilities.
Correct.
And so the whole point is that this is a very, from my point of view, it's a tricky situation, and that we're expecting people for a year to fill in on that. So I have a slightly different take, which is we're really saying, and I totally agree with, we've got to see if this is successful, but the point is, and I asked this very pointed question last time, are we not implicitly really saying that we're committing to this master scheduler for that 2020 year? And the answer I heard was really, the answer is yes, because that is a gap. And the term purity has been used here, which I still think is a wacky term. But okay, the fact is, what it means is that the schedule that the students have is, quote, pure because you allow them to be with their cohorts on the core classes that they're taking. That is a difficult thing to do today, is clearly the issue, and we want to have fidelity to the academies. And so having this master scheduler as somebody who's there year-round not only allows that to process to have a real fidelity, you have somebody whose job it is to make sure so that, as we know in the private sector, because somebody says they're going to do something, you have to check the work essentially and do what you can to improve it. So I think part of this, from my point of view, is that we are committing to a process that really allows us to increase the value of academic achievement through the academies and to make the teacher's job, I don't want to say easier, but more manageable by having the same group of kids throughout each of the core subject areas. So from my point of view, this was well thought out. I think there's been a lot of good information. We asked a ton of questions at the Committee of the Whole. The administration answered that. So I'm very much in favor of this, including the fact that we are really saying that this is something that's really of importance to us on academic achievement and that we're committing to it over the long haul.
Yes, we're confident that the training will have a very positive impact, but again, we won't make a commitment to that full-time person until we come back to the board with our results.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Now, we'll have the coordinator call the roll on the approval of the high school master scheduling proposal.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Second action item tonight is the recruitment incentives that were presented by Claire Ferguson and Matt Zediker from HR. Is there a motion, a second to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Ms. McCullough?
They're here?
Matt's here.
Matt? Oh. So when you brought this forward and you talked about high need, difficult placements, and I asked you the question about speech therapists and psychologists, have they been added to it, or is this?
Right. We in speaking with Dr. Jarrett, we decided not to add them on this first go-around. We wanted to look at this target population that we identified in the presentation in terms of secondary math, science, special ed teachers, and bilingual teachers. So we focus in on classroom teachers for this first round, but that's something that we're going to continue to discuss and how we want to add positions for these incentives when we get some data back.
Are filled by by our own employees as compared to being contracted? What percentage?
In what
Psych and
positions?
speech.
I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I should have asked you that question. I just, it worries me, and putting it off, and we have to meet the needs of our special needs students. We have via the state, and we're paying contract, and maybe it's cheaper, I don't know, because we don't have to pay benefits. But it's also good when people are dedicated to the district.
Yep, we'll
because they're
certainly
our
keep that
employees.
in mind. Yep.
Yep. Mr. Dixon, are you next?
Yeah, if I can get to work. So I see that we cap out at 150,000. Is that a renewal every year, or we have to be approved, or what's
We
the...
would like to build that into the budget every year.
Okay.
So coming to the board at this time is, number one, the idea of the incentives, but then the ability to work with Ms. Yar and the finance team in terms of finances for this year, so that we can hire this year for next year, but then build it into the budget so that we have it.
So it's for relocation, 3,000 for relocation,
3,000 for housing incentive, and then a 3,000 signing bonus. Those would be the options.
all or one?
The concept is one. However, I do feel like it's important to give Claire and her team all of those arrows in the quiver, if you will, if they find those special teachers that have multiple certifications that we need, and that's what it's going to take. But the idea is not to give all of them to everybody.
Okay.
Mr. Rollins, did you have a question? Okay, all right. All right, I have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the recruitment incentive item 13B.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next action item is the decennial safety survey that Mr. Phillips presented. Is our motion to approve this item?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Any questions or discussion? Mr. Siegel.
This is a document that, because of the timing, I think can be particularly useful to the board. As we see this come up, we are going to examine the overall safety of the buildings. We can see how effectively this facilities master plan is working, see how we address a lot of these safety issues. And I hope it's something that we can refer to as we begin to build the next facilities master plan.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Now I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item C, the decennial safety survey.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Okay.
The motion passes unanimously.
Our next items are related and they're items D, E, and F, explore learning A and Z, A through Z, and linking maps. All right, if we do those together, everybody okay with that? So then I'll take a motion to
So moved.
approve items D, E, and F.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Questions or discussion? If not, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the three action items D, E, and F.
Mr. Escobedo? Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We are now on to new business, and administration is asking this board to suspend parliamentary rules to forego its two-reading rule for this agenda item, thereby approving the fiscal year 18 audited financial statements this evening. Administration requests to suspend this rule due to the audit work not being completed in time to accommodate the two readings rule, as this board meets only once in December. The district currently has an extension granted from the Regional Office of Education until December 14th for the fiscal year 18 audit. So I guess we need a motion first to suspend the rules.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second.
second by Mr. Siegel. Questions or discussion? Mr. Rollins?
Yeah, I mean, for discussion, stuff happens. So I'm not going to vote against this, but I'm not going to let it go either. Okay. So normally, in the past, when we've gotten the audit, it's gone through a committee first, then it's gone to a first reading of the board, and then it's going to go to a second reading of the board. It's basically a $500 million organization. CAFRA alone is 188 pages long, and that's not the only document. And we've been given 4 days. Look at this. And everybody up here, other than Mr. Scrivano, has a job. He's retired.
That's right. So I'm a grandpa
Uber driver, though.
So I think this is unfair to us, and I don't think this is good governance, and I hope this really never happens again.
Well, that is certainly not my intent, is to bring it forward with the double asterisk. There was a problem with our allocations from the actuary that for the state numbers, so we were waiting for those as well. It really wasn't, we couldn't present the audit when the actuarial study was off $200 million, I believe, so we had to hold back. It did go to Cabinet November 19th, but it had said that it was going to change. So we really didn't have much time as well, and we thought that report was actually going to come in a week earlier than it actually did. So we had very little time as well to do our review process, but we had, as you did, Mr. Rollins, a very nice job of going through the audit report. I did as well. We had a number of people going through it. Auditors went through it as well. So we did have a lot of changes, a lot of eyes on it. We do not want to do that. I don't think that I don't know if I brought this way that last year, but I certainly don't intend to in the future. But with the allocation with the state, we really didn't have a choice either. And ROE is not, they do not like to extend past December. So we could have done a special board meeting to, bring that forward, and you'd have a little bit more time. So those are really our options at this point.
Okay. Mr. Connor?
So I agree with Mr. Rollins wholeheartedly on this one. What I'll ask, and I think the part that what Mr. Rollins brought up, I think is a really good point that I will emphasize, is it typically did go through a finance committee. I think that's a great point. And one of the things that I would say is that, and this is my own fault, I've been on the board long enough, and maybe I should have this process memorized, but I really think it's important, because especially if we have preliminary numbers that don't change or something, I don't know if I'm asking for a separate session on this, but I will say this is a lot to go through, even if you're used to dealing with financial reports. So one of the suggestions that I've got is that if we understand the process perhaps a little better, maybe there's another time frame where most large works are done in sections. And while I totally understand the end numbers, if there was an actuarial problem and dealing with actuaries for a living, I totally understand how that could happen. But I think the point is that if we had perhaps some earlier review cycles where at least parts of this we could go through, that would be really helpful. And I don't know what the actual cycle is on some of this.
You really don't want to have to piecemeal that, because we have the fund financial statements and we have government-wide financial statements. Well, if you do the fund financial statements, you can't tie out half of the footnotes. So without that, it's very difficult to separate that. It just really tends to bog you down. And, I'd asked the auditors for it early, and we went through the audit report, but really I couldn't tie out all those footnotes. I could without the $200 million. There's a
difference of 200 million.
Yeah.
So I'm tying out something that I'm going to have to tie out again. So, you know, it's really better to look at it as a whole because it really goes together. And then you're just going to have to review it again. So typically when you're in audit, as I was an auditor, as you might know, you really try to look at the whole package together because it's really hard to separate this. The only way you can do it is government-wide and the fund financial statements separately, I believe. But then your footnotes, you can't tie out half of them.
Yeah. All I'll say is I think we're expressing something here that I think the one point I would make is that if you read what our position is, I mean, oversight is one of our key ones. And, you know, this to me is almost the ultimate oversight, right? That certainly the transactional part is a big part of what we do, and we spend a lot of time. But I think this report is one that, if I might say so, we're really on the hook for this. I mean, I think, right, because we are the governing board, this is one of our major pieces of oversight. So one of the things I would ask is, and I totally understand the situation as you described it, but perhaps, you know, if there was something, you know, maybe there's other thoughts or approaches, and I'm not saying tonight, because I know I didn't, again, with apologies, bring this up ahead of time, because I was too busy reading this. No. So what I'll say is that I'd at least like us to think about what our process is, what the dependencies are, and what that looks like.
The process going forward would go to the committee of the whole first and then go to the board for review, just like everything else. We were just short this time, and what my original plan, because of the actuarial being so late, was to push this out to you to review, but then when the actuarial report didn't come out until a week later, then there wasn't time to do this ahead of time.
Can I ask, I mean, I know this is going to sound sarcastic, and it's part of my nature, so I apologize. But I mean, we do pay the actuaries, right? I mean, we do have contractual arrangements for all
This was a state actuary, so this is not one that we hired. So this was, we were waiting for the TRS.
If I could just interject, and based on the feedback, what I will assure the board is, first of all, apologize on behalf of for everyone for giving you such short lead time on this. And what I will suggest is that Board President Scrivano and I will work together in the future, and I will offer the board a special meeting if we ever are in this circumstance again, and we'll let you make that choice whether you want to have the extra time. I certainly have complete confidence that that will not be a regular occurrence. The state is not in the habit of putting us in this situation. Fully support the hard work that Ms. Yar and the team did to prepare this for tonight. But in the future, I will take the responsibility to make sure that I work with Board President Scrivano to give that option at the agenda planning meeting. That was an oversight on my part.
So would that, I would just ask the question then, so for next year, would it come to the committee of the whole then in November or October, or when do you see that coming to committee?
November. There's not possible way. We have a 60-day recognition period, so we have to wait until that happens. So you think about that June 30th or August 30th. That's not a lot of time to close the books and to prepare something like this. So that's why it gets into November. I know in the past we've done November, but to do a really good job, you need to have, you need to have that 6 weeks to get this audited and through, at least.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. I'll have the coordinator call the roll on the motion to suspend the rules.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins? Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Sorry.
That's all right.
That's right.
That's all right. You'll get around to me.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCullough?
Yes. We can always add a meeting in December, guys.
Mr. Connor?
Yeah.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
So I'll now take a motion and a second to approve the fiscal year 18 audited financial
So
statements.
moved.
By Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Questions or discussion?
Are we getting any presentation on the?
Yes, right.
So Matt Zedeker is going to pull this up for us. We actually have our auditors here who will do the presentation like we normally do. So we have Jason Askin. He's a senior manager at Sickage, so he'll be presenting tonight. And then I will answer any questions after that presentation and go over one more document with you.
Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you. As Michelle mentioned, I'm Jason Askin. I'm the senior manager at Sickage, in charge of the district audit. I also have Lindsay Fish with me here tonight, who's the manager on the audit. So on behalf of Sickage, I'd like to thank the district for the opportunity to serve as the district's independent auditors for the year ended June 30th, 2018. The audit's not a short process. We began our process with a planning meeting and preliminary fieldwork in June, conducted final fieldwork in September, and are presenting the results of the audit here tonight in December. So we commend Michelle and her team, the finance team. There's a lot of work that goes into preparing for and facilitating all of the requests that are part of this audit. So we thank RPS and the finance team for all their hard work in this process. There's 3 components to the presentation that I'd like to review with you all tonight. The financial results of the comprehensive annual financial report, the communication with those charged with governance, which is the board communication that you see there, and then the other reports that we're required to issue as part of our audit. Before we get into the financial results of the CAFR, we're pleased to report that we're issuing an unmodified opinion on these financial statements. An unmodified opinion is the highest form of opinion that you can receive under an audit under generally accepted auditing standards. So we commend the district on receiving an unmodified opinion. It's also known as a clean opinion. You might have heard it referred to as a clean opinion, or an unqualified opinion was the old terminology. So starting with the general fund, at the end of the year, June 30th, 2018, had approximately $71 million in unassigned fund balance, which represented approximately a $12 million increase from the prior year, June 30, 2017. This was primarily due to the evidence-based funding that was received at the end of fiscal year 18, which is most of what's attributable to that $12 million increase that you see there. The other governmental funds of the district, the capital projects fund, had a decrease of approximately $34 million. This was the spend down of the bond proceeds for capital. The bond and interest fund had an increase of approximately $2.5 million, and this represents the amount of taxes that were in excess of the principal and interest due on the district's long-term debt. The aggregate non-major fund saw a small decrease of approximately $1.5 million from the previous year. In addition to the district's governmental funds, the district reports an internal service fund, which is the health insurance fund. And the fund balance of the internal service fund, the health insurance fund, was approximately $3.2 million at June 30th, 2018, which was an increase of about $4.7 million over the prior year. And that was attributable to 2 primary factors. One, claims experience came out in a little bit below budget, and there were several large stop-loss reimbursements that were received in the current fiscal year that attribute to that $4.7 million increase in the internal service fund balance. As part of the audit, we review fund balance policy compliance. The district has a minimum fund balance policy of maintaining 25% of current operating expenditures in the general operations and maintenance and transportation funds. And the district was in compliance with its minimum fund balance policy at June 30th, 2018. It came in at about 31%, so about 6% above the minimum required that you see there. And that, again, is primarily due to that evidence-based funding received late in the year that attributed to that excess, so to speak. The recognition score bullet point at the bottom is the recognition score on the ISB AFR. So the ISB AFR measures 5 benchmark categories that determine that composite score of 3.7 that you see there on the screen. This is up slightly from fiscal year 2017. The previous recognition score was about 3.6, and that increase is attributable to an increase in the legal debt margin, which is basically the EAV and the maximum allowable debt minus the bonded debt outstanding at fiscal year end. So that category of the benchmark increased slightly, that attributed to that 0.1% increase that you see there. All the other benchmark categories remain consistent with the prior year. So the government fund statements that we just talked about are your modified accrual financial statements. Those are prepared more on the budgetary basis of accounting and the current resources measurement focus. The government-wide financial statements are on the full accrual basis, so they include all capital assets and long-term debt of the district. You'll note that the net position deficit, the district reported a net position deficit of approximately $65 million at June 30th, 2015, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later in the slide. But that $65 million deficit that you see there is comprised of three components. The district's net investment in capital assets of $92 million, which is the district's capital assets less any debt obtained to acquire those assets. Restricted fund balance of $62 million, and then an unrestricted deficit of $218 million. So we talked a little bit previously before I started presenting about the actual report from the state and the timing of that, which kind of feeds into this decrease in net position that you see here of $238 million. So at June 30th, 2018, the district was required to implement GASB Statement 75, accounting and financial reporting for post-employment benefits other than pensions. So you may recall a couple of years ago, June 30th of 2015, when we had to implement GASB Statement 68, which changed the way that governmental entities are required to report pensions on their financial statements. And it brought those pension liabilities onto the books of all the governments in Illinois, and just governments in general in the United States, under GASB Statement 68. So GASB Statement 75 does that same thing for OPEB. What GASB Statement 75 doesn't do is it doesn't change the benefits that are earned for health insurance, the benefits that are paid for and provided by the district, or how you budget or pay for health insurance benefits. It only changes how GASB requires you to account for and report those OPEB liabilities on your government-wide financial statements, which is your full accrual statements. So it doesn't affect any of your operating funds or operating statements, this change in the standards. But you will notice that implementing this standard did have a $239 decrease in net position on the government-wide statement of net position. The notes to the financial statements are largely consistent with the previous year, with the exception of GASB Statement 75, which significantly expanded the OPEB note disclosures in accordance with GASB 75. These are just some of the larger pension and OPEB liabilities that are included in the notes to the financial statements. The teacher's retirement system net pension liability was $58 million. IMRF reported a net pension asset of approximately $10 million. IMRF had a really good year, so the net pension asset represents the amount that the assets at IMRF exceed the actually projected benefits to the retirees of IMRF. The OPEB liability for the teacher's health insurance system is the state cost-sharing plan that the district participates in. And under GASB Statement 75, this is the proportionate share of the state plan that the district is required to report on its financial statements under GASB 75. And then the district has an other OPEB plan that was approximately $55 million at year end. Before we move on to the board communications, are there any questions on the financial statements or the CAFR that I might be able to address?
Mr. Connor.
Yeah. So this accounting standard change, will that potentially affect our bond ratings in the future? Is that one of the outcomes of this?
It should not impact the bond rating because every government in Illinois is implementing GASB Statement 75, and it doesn't affect your operating funds or your budget. So the bond agencies are aware that this is a very long-term liability. Over 30 years, this is what the benefits are projected to be over, or amortized over rather. So we do not anticipate that that there will be ratings decreases as a result of GASB Statement 75 being implemented.
And I guess then the second part of this is, because it is long-term, how much volatility is there in this number?
So the footnotes is a great place to see that. Just like the pension liabilities are very sensitive to the estimates that go into them and the assumptions that are used by the actuaries, the OPEB liability is no different, if not even more sensitive, that number that you see up there, to the assumptions. And there's a number of sensitivity analyses in the footnotes that kind of illustrate what a 1% swing in either direction for the two significant assumptions would do to that number.
So I guess this kind of begs the third question, which is, what is the true impact then of this standard? Is this just, I know it's not abstract money, but I mean, I'm just really interested in what the impact really is of this.
So it's purely financial reporting, as I mentioned. It doesn't affect how you pay for health insurance benefits. What the benefits are haven't changed. It's just financial reporting. A good analogy is a mortgage. Everyone has a mortgage on their house. Most people have a mortgage on their house. You pay a monthly payment to the bank.
Right.
Maybe it's $1,200, $1,500 a month you pay to the bank. Under the old guidance, GASB 45, GASB only required you to report a liability if you were behind on your payment or if you're behind on your payments. They didn't care about what the total mortgage balance was. GASB Statement 75 is similar in that under GASB 45, you only reported a liability if you were behind on the payments, on the current benefit payments. But they didn't care about what was the aggregate amount of benefits that had been earned both by current employees and retired employees that are still alive.
But if this is a liability and it can change, I mean, obviously if you have in your analogy of the mortgage, it's a fixed amount and you presumably draw that amount down, right? So, but I'm not hearing a similar process here. So I guess the question I've got is in 20 years, is that number likely to go up? And does that do something again to us? I find it hard to believe that in one sense, if it's a liability because, you know, in the analogy of the mortgage, that's taken against your income and, you know, that affects what you can actually do over the long haul. So I guess that would be my question here is that, you know, I find it hard to believe that we wouldn't have some long-term impact if that's a liability on the books and that can change.
Liability, you know, and as with the pension standards, when you use the best assumptions and estimates that are available at the time to determine this liability, and it's long-term, and it's just to show the reader of the financial statements that there is a benefits that's been earned by existing employees and retired employees. So there is a financial obligation as part of that. That you weren't able to see as clearly on the face of the statements under GASB 75. And the trend with the GASB standards, both pensions, OPEB, and the lease standard that's coming out, is to get any type of liability that's been earned onto the face of the financial statement so it's transparent to the reader, so that you don't have this. It's a full accrual basis of accounting, so that you can see any liability. And in the case of the OPEB, it's over a very long term. So the best you can do is the actuarial evaluation to come up with the actuarially determined liability, which is, as you pointed, is based on a number of assumptions.
Mr. Rollins?
Well, on the let's say specifically on the post-employment health insurance obligations, which you said was a $232 million number, which kind of surprised me because I didn't think we had that many retirement insurance obligations. I thought mostly people went onto state systems. Is this actual specific district obligations, or are we being required to book a percentage of the state obligation?
So every district is required to record their proportionate share of the state plan. That's this liability that you saw, or the teacher health insurance liability.
That's
the
what I wanted
state
to know.
cost-sharing plan.
And I don't, this is a question, I guess, on the CAFR, but I don't know if it's really for you or for Ms. Yar. There's a note on the MD&A on page 9. Revenues and expenditures were greater than budgeted by $116.6 million due to the district's inadvertent error when submitting the budget to ISBE. The on-behalf payments, we didn't include the on-behalf payments in our budget?
When I went through the budget for 18, actually the auditor had noted this and brought it to my attention because I wasn't involved with the budget process at that point last year, and I did notice that it was brought forward in the summary. When the board approved it, was brought forward on the summary, but it was inadvertently missed on those two line items on the form, which is called the 5036, which is what we submit to ISB. It was left off. There's other revenues and other expenses, and it wasn't there, and that's what was submitted.
Okay.
If there's no additional questions, we'll move on to the board communication, which is the auditor's communication to those charged with governance. So as part of our audit, we're required to communicate any material weaknesses that we note during our audit. And we're pleased to report that we don't have any material weaknesses that were noted during our audit. Under generally accepted auditing standards, you're required to communicate in writing material weaknesses and significant deficiencies. The district has chose to include both deficiencies and other comments in his communication to the board, just to have everything be fully transparent. So I only say that just to illustrate that the severity of these comments is that material weakness is a very severe internal control deficiency. Significant deficiency is less than a material weakness, but still important enough to warrant written communication to those charged with governance. Deficiencies and other comments technically aren't even required to be included in writing under generally accepted auditing standards, but they are comments for best practices that the district should consider, so we've included them in the communication here. So we had 2 repeat comments. One was just with regards to purchase card compliance. And then as part of the audit, we do a compliance test for the activity funds to test compliance with the cash handling procedures, the district's cash handling procedures. And this comment we have noted as partially implemented. Last year, there was some issues with timing of the activity funds bank reconciliations and also compliance with the cash handling procedures. This year, there were no bank reconciliations. There were just some minor issues with the cash handling procedures at the schools tested this year. There were no new comments this year, so just the 2 repeat comments that you see here. And then, as I mentioned, there are a few other comments or recommendations, which are, again, are just best practices. The first 4 that you see there are IT related. Development of an IT disaster recovery plan is always a great thing to have. IT password lockout policy, we just recommend that the district review that. A formal backup policy and a formal overall IT policy. The interactive account groups relates to the government-wide financial statements that we talked about, which is your long-term debt and your capital assets. As a best practice, we recommend that all clients include account numbers and funds in their financial statements to facilitate the government-wide financial reporting of the CAFR. And this particular comment is noted as partially implemented because the district added a capital assets fund and utilized those accounts this year, and Michelle's working with her team to address the long-term debt side of things in creating account numbers and a fund for the long-term debt accounts. There were 2 new other comments, account number uses. This is just linking the account numbers for the ISB AFR. There were a couple of reclassifications that were proposed just within revenue and expense line items. And then future accounting pronouncements we include as standard communication so that the district's aware of any GASB pronouncements that are coming down the pipeline that might impact them. So we have all of the future GASB pronouncements, again, just as an informational piece of this communication. So in addition to the CAFR and the board communication, there's a number of other reports or communications that we have included in our documents. The single audit, the district has federal expenditures, and under the Single Audit Act and Uniform Guidance is required to have a single audit since it expends greater than $750,000 of federal funds. The district's total federal expenditures were approximately $44.8 million, and of that we tested approximately $24.2 million, or 54.03%, with the 3 major programs being Title I, the Sager School Improvement Grant, and the Special Education Cluster, the IDEA program. We issue a separate management letter that kind of details in detail the compliance findings that were noted in the board communication. We just have a general comment in the board communication, but that activity fund management letter shows all the detailed results of our testing at the various schools that were tested this year. We're issuing an unmodified opinion on the State Adult Education and Family Literacy Grant Program, and we will issue the ISB AFR upon finalization of the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. The ISB Annual Financial Report is the same financial information in the CAFR, just presented in the ISB AFR format. Any questions I can address?
Do we audit the use of early childhood funds that we get? Is that under Title I? Is that where that is, or?
I think that's a separate grant.
It's a separate grant, but it is tested if they select it for testing.
Okay. Any other questions?
I guess I just want to add a couple of things just as a takeaway. Sometimes when the auditors, they're presenting what they have to present, but there's really more to the story, more to the background of all the work that has gone into the last 2 years with my team. We've ended up with this year only having 2 journal entries, adjusting journal entries, which both were immaterial. The net effect on fund balance was $78,000, which is not anything on $490 million, it is immaterial by every viewpoint that you're looking at. We do not have any single audit findings. Everything was done timely. All the grant reporting was done timely. We do bank reconciliations. We do all of our balance sheet reconciliations on a monthly basis, which is really important for controls. We find things that are going wrong very quickly, and my team has spent so many hours, and we've had a real sense of urgency in the last 2 years to get this done. I want to give a shout out to my team. 2 of them are here tonight. They've seen the sun rise and set in the same day, and it was summertime. So I just want you to know how much dedicated this team is to really bring everything home and to really do a great job. And I think that our results our data and our results are seeing this. I apologize for the late report this year. It was difficult with the state actuarial being incorrect the first go around, but we do intend to make those deadlines barring any big problems in the future.
I also want to applaud Michelle and the team and both our outside auditing team, but also the very, very hard work that's gone on in the team. So thank you. Appreciate all your hard work to deliver this. And again, I'll own my share of the responsibility for making sure that I communicate better with the board. I think Mr. Rollins brought up an excellent point, and I'll make sure that that doesn't happen again, that we either do one-on-one meetings, Mrs. McCulloch suggested that, or to give board members time to have more opportunity to vet it, or we'll give the board the opportunity to call a special meeting.
Mr. Rollins?
Yeah, I actually also wanted to note that I think this is the lowest number of deficiencies I've ever seen in any of the audits that I've seen as a school board member. 2 deficiencies that are noted, on the credit purchasing cards. I don't want to minimize this, but the occurrence of the findings is much lower than what we've seen in the past, so it's moving in the right direction. And these are all things that we've talked about, and I know that the administration is working on a plan to solve these issues. Are we done? Are we going to get into general questions, or do you still have more presentation?
I just, 2 quick things. One is I did read the response on the cards and talking about the hiring of the purchasing director and so forth, which was a good thing. So I did notice that. And the second thing I want to say is that I hope it didn't come across as criticism of the staff or anything like that, because that was not our intention. It was really more the scenario, so the staff's done a great job. Mrs. Yarrow, you've done a great job. So it really, the actual results are quite good. It's really, I hope everybody understands that from our standpoint, there's a bit of pressure to look at these, and that's what we're expressing. So I want to say that to you and the staff, thank you, and didn't want those comments to come across as critical.
Okay. Now, general questions for Ms. Yarrow?
I actually didn't really have any questions. I just had some comments.
Okay.
And I've already talked to Ms. Yarrow about this, but I've pointed out we do have a reserve policy, and our actual board policy says that we as a board are supposed to review our reserves once a year. So I've just suggested that it's a good time, once we get the formal numbers in from the audit, to actually look at our reserves. Do that tonight or not, and I wasn't expecting her to. I was just saying at some point we shouldn't forget to do that. Maybe we can do it right now. Yeah.
About this during the tax levy. So what I did when we presented the tax levy was did that graph where it showed the 25% with our projected numbers. So our projected numbers were at 125 million. We exceeded that, so we're at 31%, mainly because of the evidence-based funding. So we really have, we've met that all along, and we're in a good position. We're at 6% over what our fund balance policy really is. So this was available, and Mr. Rollins had asked me for that. So it is a good time to review this again when we have our actual results in. But as I said, there's not much difference because the journal entry is, $78,000, so it wouldn't make a difference on what you're seeing. We can do this, at any time, because what you're getting is really reliable data as we're presenting it on a monthly and year-end basis.
And I just encourage the board members, the CAFR has at the end a section that's, I think, sometimes referred to as the statistical section, which is not prepared by the auditors. It's our internal. I always look at that because it gives you a really good sort of scan, environmental scan of what's going on in the district and in our community. And there are just a few things that I wanted to pull out just to mention them. So it's a good news. If you look on numbered page 135, if you're doing this on your iPad, it's closer to like 180 or somewhere around there. Our assessed value within the district has gone up 2 years in a row after going down something like 7 straight years in a row. So that's good news. If you look at numbered page 143, that's got the per capita income for the city of Rockford, which is now for the first time higher than it was in 2008. It's taken us a decade for personal per capita income in Rockford to get back to where it was before the Great Recession. If you look at on numbered page 146, and I think actually Mr. Siegel asked a question about this page last year, and I was looking at it again this year, so I started asking questions a little bit earlier in the process. And if you look at this, our operating expenditures, you can see our enrollment is flat. It's actually down about 500 students, but our operating expenditures are up 178 million. So I did ask a question about what's going into that number. A little more than half of that is actually just the fact that we're booking the increases in the state's on-behalf payments. So out of that 178 million increase, $91 million of that is simply increases in the state's, annual increases in the state's on-behalf payments into the teacher's pension system. So the teacher's pension system is underfunded. The state has been shoveling more and more money into it. We never see a dime of that. It's not even a pass-through. Just to remind everybody, and anybody who does happen to be listening, that doesn't come into us. It doesn't go out from us, but we are required by the state to book it on our financial statements. But that does mean that our actual operating expenditures are up in the past decade $87 million a year. And you can see, I haven't done the math on if you pull out the on-behalf payments, what that means for cost per pupil, but the cost per pupil has gone up pretty significantly as well over the past 10 years. If you look at page 147, that shows our school buildings and our administrative buildings. I've mentioned this a couple of times. I'm just going to mention it. If you look at the administrative buildings, if you go back the full 10 years, so we've increased our administrative square footage by about 110,000 square feet with the same number of pupils, same number of students. In the past 4 or 5 years, we've increased it about 20,000 square feet. The number, if you look at the schools, and I did ask this question, so the square footage for the buildings, for the schools that's being reported there does not include our vacant buildings. It does not include our vacant buildings. So we've done this facilities plan, we've closed schools, and we increased our square footage, right now anyway, by, 367,000 square feet since 2009. So, I raise these questions every once in a while, and I'm going to raise it again. When we increase our square footage, we don't have more kids, that's a permanent increase in our operating costs. So when we have these discussions, I just want everybody to keep a copy of this document and keep that in mind. And I think that the other questions that I had have all been answered. The pages on the number of employees that we have been changed. What you've got on your board docs has been updated since the weekend, if you looked at it over the weekend. There might have been another page that was, the square footage page was changed as well.
So it's updated on board docs now, that's correct?
I checked and it's updated on board docs now.
What's the page?
Mr. Connor, are you done? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm done.
Mr. Connor, you're next.
Yeah, boy, now I'm trying, hope I remember everything. I did notice one fact that you had on there, and when I was looking this through, I just didn't have time to write all my questions on, but one was, it was saying by 2020, I think, that we were down like, I want to say 2,000 students or something like that. There was some number in there that struck me, and I wondered if that was off the net overall, because that's like 28,400 or whatever that is, or was that minus the charter schools, because that accounts for about 2,000. Because I was surprised. We've said we're flat, and your report said that we were actually down. Again, I don't remember the exact number, but it was north of 2,000. So that one struck me as kind of weird. The other thing I will say, I noticed the same thing Mr. Rollins did on this chart that's up. The good news from my point of view is, if you will, our net position, if I can use a private sector term, and yes, I hate fund accounting, I think it's ridiculous, but okay. Having said that, the fact is that that number, that percentage has gone up from the upper 20s to low 30s. So I really, again, for the public, I mean, that's a really good thing, because that does affect our bond ratings for sure, is having that standard and having that more. So that was a good trend to see, because we've been concerned about that. The other thing I'll say is, yeah, I do wonder, and I'll say this out loud, when you look at that square footage number, there are some things about it that just, you know, I'm not sure exactly how we're doing that. And I think one of the things, and I had promised Mr. Phillips that I would spend time with him, and that will be one of our topics, is, you know, how are we actually going after that square footage number, and what we anticipated to do, because one of the things I'll say is, in that facilities plan, one of the assumptions was that our overall, you know, burden on the square footage was going to go down. And I'm just surprised, you know, is it timing because of buildings not being totally gone, or, you know, where we are in the cycle? So I would like to follow up on some of that. And really, there's a cost per pupil number, which I think, if I might say so, we really need to understand the components. But my sense is that we're trying to contain these costs, but there might be some things that we're doing, and my example is, if, and it said this earlier in the CAFR report, so, you know, we had a purchasing director and so on and so forth. If we are trying to advance, I think maybe what we owe each other is to say, here are the reasons why something increased, you know, and what that basis is. And I think I agree with Mr. Rollins. These pages are very handy, and they are something that I know. All nerds, raise your hand. Come on, you right there. Thank you very much. You, yeah. And you, come on. All right. Amy, come on. Raise your hands. But these are things that I think do form the basis of some good discussions, and that there are some details behind this that would be really good to see. And I really do commend Mrs. Yar, again, seeing some of these things visually, which you and I transparently have talked about. I think some of this would make really good visuals, because you could see that square footage number, you could see the per pupil, you could see a number of these things, and then what the projected is going to be. I think that would be very useful.
Yeah, my intent for next year is to put some visuals in the MD&A. I think the MD&A is another piece that really tells the whole story. It's our opportunity to talk about how the district has done for the past year, and it really compares the 2 years. So I find that very helpful, but some visuals there would be something I'm going to add for next year.
Mr. Siegel.
I think there are more than 3 people watching and listening, so I'm going to talk to those more than 3 and say, this CAFR is a really amazing document, and don't judge it by what you see up on this screen right now. There are a few people who are going to look at that and go, wow, that's going to be really scintillating reading. There is an introduction to the CAFR that is really illuminating, because it's going to talk about how the finances of the district for a school year that's already passed touched all our goals and our strategies, And I think this is going to be worthwhile reading to our general public, especially for those who are concerned about, the 205 being the largest portion of their property tax bill. In this document, people can easily see all of the different ways that finances influence this operation, whether it's, how activity funds are handled, to, what portion of this building do we generate some revenue through a lease, to how much the state permits us to have indebtedness based upon our property tax. This is all pretty interesting stuff, I would think, to a lot of people, and it is presented in a text format that is very, very readable and very approachable, and I think it makes this part make a lot more sense too. I would definitely encourage anybody who has any remote interest in how 205 happens to be spending its dollars to take a look at this document, read the parts of that, are just in the introduction if you want. There's enough there to answer a lot of questions.
Thank you. Any other general questions for Ms. Yar? Okay. So we need to vote on the approval of the audit.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Okay, our next action item, or not, our new business item, is Dr. Vosberg on the Thinking Maps Learning Community License Renewal for Lathrop.
Before Dr. Vosberg addresses that, again, this is a situation where we had an aggregation of school asks that added up on this Thinking Maps. So Lathrop, we've addressed this topic previously. Lathrop just is, again, another school that is above the $10,000 threshold. So anytime that occurs, we would come back to the board, and so that's what we're doing. But Thinking Maps is something that's widely utilized in our schools.
Okay, Dr. Vosberg.
Just to reiterate Dr. Jarrett's thoughts, this is a contract to approve the site license. This is a web-based program. There's eight maps that are available to use at the school level. Gives teachers, students, and the principals a common language around how they organize information, compare and contrast data. It's been used for a couple of years. I think Lathrop was actually the first school to get results. So you've already approved professional development, and this is the site license renewal. So they've currently used the product and want to renew the license, and this happens to be the school that triggered the over $10,000 amount.
I see. Okay. All right, any questions for Dr. Vosberg? Now, this will come to us for approval at our January 8th board meeting. Mr. Slife, three-tier bus scheduling.
All right. I'm going to give everybody some great stuff to think about until January. What I have here, is a proposal for efficient routing. What we have for our problem is we have a driver shortage and we have been increasing our costs. Our driver shortage is a national problem. It's not just a local thing. As our economy takes off, there are more jobs, obviously. School bus driving is not necessarily where everybody wants to end up. So they go and they take some of those other jobs. Our pool of drivers goes down. So, and it happens, like I said, nationwide. We've increased costs with the people that we have left. We have had to do things such as put more students on buses, make route times longer, and use less people to do more stuff. And what I want to try to get is get away from that. Our background, we currently do a two-tiered bus system. We bus everybody in their the majority, elementary first, and then our middle and high school second. We've done pay adjustments and bonuses so far. We adjusted pay scales in the last negotiation series. We pay $14 an hour to start, which is fairly good. We've done some refer a friend bonuses, and then we've added a category of drivers called the substitute bus driver, which only work when they're available and when we call them in, which we call them daily. So they work when they can. And then currently when we adjust and do routing efficiencies and put more kids on the buses, we've increased our average ride time up just over 10% to 21.37 minutes. So they're on there 10% longer than they were before. Some alternative choices, really there are just two: doing exactly what we're doing currently and seeing how we hire and how we get through the day, or we can look at a three-tier bus system. And I'll go through that with you here. The solution for me, the three-tier bus system for the 2019-20 school year, we would go through the following. We'd move our elementary schools up 10 minutes in the morning, so they get up 10 minutes later. That lines up with the sleep studies for elementary school students. Our high schools would move up 15 minutes earlier, which greatly helps us out with getting the kids to their athletic events on time, because a lot of times you'll see the bus pulling up with the kids right before it starts, and it doesn't give them time to warm up or do the things that they need to do. Our middle schools, we'd move back 15 minutes. Some of the outliers, Rolling Green and Ellis, currently they stay at their current times. Marshall Elementary is just 5 minutes earlier, but the big thing there is they get their own buses. Right now they ride in with the middle school. So they would not have to get to school a half hour early, the teachers then figure out what they're going to do with them for a half hour before they even get into the breakfast program. It solves that whole equation. And then their ride times are significantly affected because where they're on the buses longer already because we bus them in from everywhere, those times would go down. And then Montessori is the huge outlier. It's an hour and 15 minutes later, and that was one of the requests that we had from the school. It lines up a lot better with their with middle school stuff at Eisenhower. So even with the school times changing, the students' actual time on the bus will improve. I'm projecting a 9%, not quite the 10% that we raised up, but a 9% drop getting to 19.5-minute ride time compared to the current 21.37. And in most cases, except for those outliers like the hour and a half or hour and 15-minute school, your pickup and drop-off times for the students are not going to be affected. So for middle school students, what really affects for us or for me is, yeah, they're staying in school 15 minutes later, but they're still going to get home at the same time they did before because I'm able to throw more equipment at it at the end of the day. So if they got home at, let's see, if they got left at 3:45 and for whatever reason they were on until 4:45, they could leave at 4:15 and still get home at 4:45. It would be an hour later or a half hour, whatever. So as I go through total costs, it's not really a cost. They're all total savings, but there's a cost if you stay doing what we currently do. We will save $600,000 in out-of-pocket immediately year one. I put in there that you net $150 yearly, because if we didn't do it, if we spent that $600,000 really after we get our 75% in our state reimbursement, our actual cost is $150. So you can look at it either way. It's either a full 600 or the 150. $4 million in savings is my bus purchases over 10 years, and I'll get on that on the next slide. And I haven't included our savings for parts, fuel, maintenance, the downtime, and the fleet age. A lot of that is pretty fluid, so you can't quite pin down all the costs on that. On our bus savings, I'm projecting 40 buses at $100,000 a year to get to that $4 million. Again, with the 75%, that's our state reimbursement of if we kept doing things the way we do, we would only spend $1 million and not the whole $4 million. The reimbursement for buses is a little different. It goes through a 10-year process. So, a 5-year process. So over the 10 years, it'll take 15 to get fully reimbursed for those. And talking about the buses, where I go with the 40 buses is on our bus replacement cycle. So right now, we could cut, if we went into this 3-tier system, I could cut 40 buses out of our fleet. I could cut all the old ones that we don't want out there that need to be, that you're looking at and going, that's Rockford, as it's rolling down the road. We could continue purchasing the way we are now at 26 buses a year. Our current age of the fleet is at a 6.5-year average. This would put, if we got rid of those 40 buses, we get buses either June or July, August in there, we can get down to a 5-year fleet average immediately before we start school next year. So I think some of us like that. So in assessing our situation, we could monitor the reduction in our budget. We have a reduction in routes, we'll have a reduction in the number of buses, and we should reduce our driver turnover. On our return on investment, our spending is going to be less overall, and we can track that. And then again, our driver over turnover should decrease. With the 3-tier system, our drivers that we do employ, we will need less of them. They will be driving longer during the day because they will do 3 schools in the morning, 3 schools in the afternoon. More of a full-time job, more attractive to get employees in, even if like a 14-hour job at 8 hours compared to 5.5 or 6 is a big difference for a lot of people. So it should have a good decrease. As far as reporting back, we'd go over it again for the next school year when we were looking at the 2021 school year. Questions?
Okay. Questions for Mr. Slythe? Ms. McCullough.
So what is the state law, because I don't remember, maybe Ms. Holdley might have to answer this, for ride times for students? What is?
I do. There is not a state law on a ride time.
Or code or anything?
There is a suggestion, and it's only on special needs students to try to keep it within an hour. And that, like I said, it's a suggestion. And a lot of special needs students, if they're not local in district, we send them to, say, Woodstock or something, just to get from the house to Woodstock. If you don't pick up anybody else, could be an hour. So we go over
that special needs piece is an hour suggestion each way. It's not an hour total for the day. So there is no, because I was always under the, under the assumption, and tell me if anybody else had this, that there was a ride time limit, because parents will say that, well, my child does not fall in. Because I have somebody in my sub-district who said that they have their student who is in elementary who started at 7:45, correct, right?
Yep.
And their child was picked up at 6:19 in the morning.
Okay.
So when we look at this average, it is an average, and there are people out there with some really long.
Very far outliers, yes.
Yeah. So when you're talking about outliers not meeting it, were you talking about the outliers meaning the schools that were going to have the different times, or are you saying that there are still going to be outliers out there, meaning students who may have time changes?
You will still have those outliers. You are going to. We have, let me look at some of my notes here. I'll just take a couple schools, for example. Like at Cherry Valley School, I have a kid that currently gets picked up at 5:37. And they are out there because they are in a self-contained class. And they live on the other side of town. So we go kind of out by Marshall Elementary and pick them up before we come in back to the Cherry Valley area, pick up, and then get to school. So you're still going to have those as long as we're doing some of that stuff. We have some fit students that get picked up around 6 o'clock. that go to Gregory and Kishwaukee that have that same type of problem. And we have some bilingual students like at Washington and Gregory that are 604, 605 that, I mean, there's still going to be outliers. Those times would not change that much. They would shift just a little bit. They wouldn't be as horrible.
But they won't be earlier.
But no, they will
And
not
that
be.
was
They won't
an
be
important
earlier.
point you were making.
Right,
And the return routes, the same thing, they won't be later.
correct. Yep.
So when you said that there was a savings, and you initially said the 600,000, but we get the 75% back, so really we're saving 150, right? Just like you're saving on the buses, the million, not the 4
Right.
million. I think
If-
that
if-
that could be,
If you continue down the current path, yeah, we're spending the 150,000, not saving the 600.
and so those 40 buses, when you get rid of them, will somebody else buy them?
No.
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 Would you like one?
Unless you can find
There aren't
somebody
any
to.
churches, there's nobody that we can donate them to and get some sort of, oh, we don't pay taxes now.
Yeah. I mean, you could always open it up to try to do something for sale. Yeah.
Maybe we could send them to our high school students to work on them.
45, some ideas are coming up.
Yeah. All right, thank
So,
you.
Yeah, those buses that we have that are in that, the 40 bus extras are 18 years old, 19 years old.
So realistically, where will they go?
So they will go to Bear. We'll get about $1,200 per bus, or we can add them in on our trade-ins. So I do have, I mean, we could try some other things, but.
Wow.
We've applied for a grant that we believe we're getting for 6 of those buses, which would be for $20,000 apiece. And we got it last year, and they paid us to take them to Bear and destroy them, so, because they want them off the road. So,
And that's a state grant?
it was a federal grant.
Federal?
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Connor?
In terms of the driver turnover and the rest, when we say we're going to reduce the number of buses by 40, I'm assuming that doesn't equate to an actual number. So what do you anticipate for staffing differences if we do the 3-tier?
The staffing differences, if I started tomorrow, I'd be fully staffed. I wouldn't have to get rid of anybody.
Oh, okay, so
yeah,
using that same number.
There would be no
Okay.
riffing of employees. I would actually have mechanics and prep people and supervisors and even myself on occasion not out driving routes.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So if
do a
we
lot
do
of
this
creative
plan,
stuff right
so the good news on this one is, from the staffing perspective, we would be right at essentially what we have.
Yep.
Okay. I think then the other part is, I don't know if this is practical at all, but if we have a certain savings, one of the things that strikes me as, have we ever considered, is if we have special conditions, which normally causes the outliers, and I don't know if that's a true statement, meaning there could be other quirks, if you will, of where people are geographically, but if that's one of our things, I know we wouldn't want to have special treatment, if you will, but I'd be very curious to know if there are alternates that we could engage that would be relatively cost neutral, so some poor kid is not on the bus for an hour and a half or whatever that is. Have we looked at those kinds of alternatives?
Right now, we don't have a lot of options because I can't increase because I don't have the drivers.
Right, I understand
I
that.
have the bus sitting in the lot. I could go use it. I just don't have the
A smaller,
staff to go
okay.
do it.
All right.
And
So we could have
our contractor
alternatives.
has the same problem.
Yeah,
So
sure.
I can't give it to them, which we normally would.
Yeah.
On a huge outlier like that, we would give it to our contractor to have them pick up as well, and that's not an option this year. So if it saves us drivers and it saves them drivers, in theory, but I can't promise there won't be the
I'm
outliers.
not asking
but
for a promise.
yeah,
I'm just curious
In
if
theory,
we
we
had
should be able to then
alternates.
cover some of those.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I had a couple questions. Why isn't Rolling Green and Ellis time changing?
Because they're already kind of odd.
Are they? Okay.
So Rolling Green is already at 9 o'clock currently. which fits into my later time slot at the high school level, or the middle school level. And Ellis is already at 8:30. It's not at the elementary time either, and it fits into that second, the middle school level. So I didn't have to move them around.
Okay. And I mean, you certainly know this business better than we do, but why would you say having 6 routes instead of, why is that more attractive to a prospective new employee? They get more hours in a week? Is that basically what it is?
Right now, there's a guarantee of 5.25 hours when they come on.
Okay.
I wouldn't change the guarantee in the contract. There would be no reason to do that. But the actuality of, instead of maybe getting 6 hours, getting closer to 7 or 8, I mean, as I'm looking for employment, I would rather have closer to an 8-hour day than I would a 5 or a 6-hour day. So.
I was just thinking of people who are retired and do bus driving just as a part-time job. That probably wouldn't be that attractive to them.
Right. And that there will still be, when you look at all my numbers, there are still, because of the way things are set up, there will still be some routes that only have 2 schools and a few that just have 1 school. I think there were 10 that still only could do 1 school a day, morning, afternoon.
All right, Ms. McCulloch, I think you were next.
I've already had a turn, so
All right,
I'll see
so Mr. Rollins,
Mr. Rollins and Mr. Escobedo, and then I'll go back.
Mr. Rollins, you want to go next?
There was just one thing that jumped out at me, just because and that's the proposal to do a separate busing for Marshall Elementaries, simply because we were involved in the facilities plan, which predates you, at a time when the elementary students were at Washington and the middle students were at Marshall, and we were told we should try to get them in the same campus so that we could get them all on the same bus, because that would save us a bunch of money, just having one bus pick up, because we had so many people with siblings. Why are we now separating it out and saying we'll have different buses?
You would tend to save more money with the amount of drivers that you had to keep them together. This is better for the kids, better for the students. It does cost, it won't cost us more money if we decrease, because we're decreasing the number of total employees. It is less efficient, I'll agree, than the way it's currently set up, but it's better for them. Right now, they have issues at the schools where they have to figure out what they're doing with them. And it really puts, not their ride time, but the total time that they're on the bus. Like in the afternoon, those elementary kids get on first, and then they ride around to the other school, and then they sit there and they wait till that dismissal. Then they get on the bus, the other kids get on the bus, and then they go home. So it greatly increases that time, and we get a lot of complaints. Yeah.
Mr. Escobedo.
So at the end of the day, implementation is key. And assuming this happens next year, what are the planning steps or dry runs and so forth so that we eliminate any potential issues? I know that's, unfortunately what happens at the beginning of the school year, we have one issue and it becomes large in the media, and it seems like there's one issue. The perception becomes that there's one issue is duplicated throughout, and that's not quite the case. Can you speak a little bit to as far as how you guys would prepare for this rollout to be as seamless, as smooth as possible?
Yep. We would let the drivers obviously know before they even left to go home for the summer what was going on. The routes, because of the nature of it, are done. They are all mocked up and ready to go with current year data and everything. And obviously once we did our rollover and we got our new kids, then some of that would change. But essentially the routing part is already done. So that the big part's done. The driver piece, instead of doing 2 mandatory dry runs and then 1 optional day of dry runs, we're going to do 3 full days of dry runs and then a 4th optional, so they have an extra day to go at it. A lot of these people like to go and to drive and to do, so I think adding the extra school shouldn't be that too bad to do, honestly. It should be okay, and giving them an extra day of dry run should help ease that beginning of the school year pain.
Okay, Ms. McCulloch.
The question about Marshall, it's only the going home that they'll be on different buses. Would that be correct, since they're both starting at 9?
I
Won't
have
they
them-
both be on the same bus going there?
I have them on separate buses going.
Why?
Currently, and then they have, if a parent would have a not a problem, would request that they wanted their younger student to ride with their older, we have that ability.
Okay, I still don't understand why. So both campuses start at 9. Why wouldn't you just pick up all Marshall kids at 9? Or, I mean, for the 9 o'clock start. I can see the 3:25 versus the 4 o'clock, but I don't understand why you wouldn't just get them all.
Okay. Right now, we take them all, we drop off at the middle school in the morning, and then we go directly to the elementary and drop them off and go. They are at school a half hour before they're supposed to be there for the breakfast program. So you have all your students that ride buses at school a half hour theoretically unattended. So the school, the teachers, the administration, I'm not sure what they do there. They do some special programming. They have a rotation of people that come in and do things.
Because we only have
We don't-
breakfast program at the elementary, is that what you're saying? I'm still
No,
not clear.
school starts 45, 50 minutes after they get there.
No, I understand that, but in your proposal here, the start times are lined up. You have Marshall Middle
Correct.
School starting at 9, and you
Right.
have Marshall Elementary starting at 9.
Right, because that's
So why do
currently
those
what
have
they
to be
do.
different buses?
They don't have to be. They can be on the same.
Wouldn't that?
If I'm doing it in the PM and I'm not doing it in the AM, they just won't line up. I can. I'll just have less people working 3 and 3.
This is
Yeah.
only once they had.
Yeah, the other issue is that you have to drop them off at 2 different campuses, so you would either be picking them up still earlier, one or the, because you have to.
They're right across the parking lot from each other.
Okay, so
They are across the parking lot, but it still takes time to pull in, to offload the certain kids and get them back.
That's all right, we'll let you guys do that.
investigate that.
If you drop off at Marshall, like currently they drop off at 8:25 at Marshall Middle School for a 9:45 start. They immediately leave at 8:25 to get to the elementary, which starts at 9:05. So they're there probably at 8:30.
I just,
She understands.
So
I'm
they're there
just
a
saying
long,
that,
long time.
I'm saying that you're going to offer it to siblings, so they're going to have to go to the 2 schools no matter what. If you're going to have some parents doing both, I mean, so let's just look at coordinating and the money or the resources involved in that. I see the charter times have had some change, and are the charter schools aware of that? And you've had conversations with them, and this is all
Currently, we have not, no.
hunky-dory, or,
We have not had discussions currently, no.
okay. Do we do that? Okay. Do we do that after we vote on it, or do we do that beforehand, so that we, I'm giggle, but
part
I'm
of the-
serious. It's
Their
a
contract
respect.
thing that's up, so.
They're one of our schools. What?
Isn't their contract up?
we have 2
There's 2 that they're, yeah. So they're negotiating that right now, or coming up.
I'll move on. I have had some feedback from parents, and I don't disagree with this. Yeah, well, we all have. But I really do understand the angst, and so when you were looking at proposals and schedules and trying to come up with the best scenarios, was one of the scenarios that you put together having the high schoolers start later? And here's the reason I ask, that many of the parents who have elementary also have middle. You know, you have your kids fairly close together. And so this greater distance in start time, 7:35 versus the 9 o'clock, is more difficult for those parents than the high school piece. Plus, the middle school students who are 13 and under, the parents aren't supposed to leave them alone. That's with state law, right? I forget the number of that law. Whereas high school students could stay home alone waiting for their bus. So did we think about that, and was it really cost prohibitive? Could we not figure out the schedules so that it would work where the high schoolers started later instead of the middle schoolers starting so late?
I'll say absolutely we could do it. The problem came in, it doesn't cost any different if you switched the 2. The difference becomes in our athletics and getting the kids to their sports on time. And how much school they're going to miss.
So we don't have
for
that problem
athletics.
with middle schoolers getting to their sports on time? I need to
So-
understand the start times.
Correct.
So in the high schools, spring sports are the biggest issue. And so baseball, softball, track, soccer, all those activities have to be done before sunset. And so even with our current schedule, there's times where kids are dismissed and missing the last hour of the day. So that would be a much larger problem at the high schools compared to middle schools, because middle schools don't have as many spring sports.
All about the sports. Okay. Parents who asked me, I asked, and you can respond accordingly.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, this will come to the board for approval at our next board meeting on the 8th of January. Next is, yes, we're going to group these all together, and Ms. Simpkins is going to go over the board policy updates, I think.
3 minutes or less.
Very good, okay.
Good evening.
We did receive an update from her on...
Last but not least.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes. So I'll keep it brief. There are 6 proposed policy changes coming before you related to instruction. All of those are statutorily driven changes to be in accord with state and federal law. There is a proposed policy change to Board Policy 4.152 to allow naming or renaming of facilities or programs. That is an effort to allow the district to explore opportunities to allow students to have vocational experiences in exchange for the naming of pathways or programs. And then we have finally a proposed change to Board Policy 7.20 to align with federal guidance on designating a Title IX non-discrimination coordinator. And that's it in brief. If you have specific questions.
All right. You know, it's the first one that's confusing me, the naming and renaming. Is that the naming
Can I
rights
share
of
that?
academies? Is that what that is about?
Well, this gives us the flexibility from a legal perspective to explore a larger board proposal that the board will be able to weigh in on, I'm anticipating in February, where we will look at a pathway branding agreement concept. It's still in development at this point. But this gives the board's policy the flexibility to even explore that.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Mr. Conner.
Yeah, I had somewhat the same question, that first part, but the only thing I'll say is, I mean, there was this whole litany, it talks about the sale of tobacco, and I mean, all this other stuff, and I was like, I'm assuming that's just like boilerplate language that the state now has said every district has to apply that. Is that why that's?
No, it's not boilerplate. It is in response to anticipated issues that might arise if the district declined to offer a naming opportunity. Those are all items or topics that would be issues for us. For example, we would not want to accept a proposal for an offer to name a pathway after someone who's promoting recreational drug use or something that is against state law or federal law.
So that's not boilerplate language.
Right.
The only reason I ask is, I understand the concern maybe a little better, and I read it twice, and I was like, okay, I know I'm slow on this one. But I think the only suggestion I've got, and maybe this is the only way to do it, is this is an enumerated list, and what I'm wondering is there general language that we could have as a replacement so that, you know, somebody says, oh, well, this isn't, you know, that condition, but would still cover us, like is there a review or some other thing, now that I understand it better, because I was really trying to.
So we have some additional guidelines that we're offering that aren't captured here in the policy because we want the flexibility to be able to change those in accord with the circumstances that may arise.
Sure.
But we would like some of it captured in board policy so that if we are faced with some type of legal challenge to the decision, we would be able to support it by pointing to
Yeah,
board
I mean, I know I see the phrase about among others. All I was trying to think is there a way to simplify it, not have an enumerated list, maybe a few examples, and either have a process or something. Would you please, I always, whenever I see specific things, you know, you could, I mean, and maybe I mean this to be sarcastic, but I mean, you know, vaping, which is such a big thing right now, and there's really a lot of objections to it, but it is a legitimate business. And so all I want to do is make sure that whatever we reflect in here is something that we can live with as more or less a framework, so.
Okay. Any other questions for Ms. Simpkins? All right. We're getting punchy here. Okay. All right, these will come for our approval by the board on our January 8th board meeting. If there are no further comments or agenda items, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
And a second to adjourn. Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 9:02.
I said 9:05.